Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Tahmid Al Hussaini from Dhaka, Bangladesh. I would first of all like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very interesting session. So with me, I have Dr. Anil Sharma to assist me. First, I would like to introduce the SOAP lecture speaker of this session. Professor Gali Madhavi Lada is a professor at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. She obtained her PhD degree from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Prior to the joining at the Indian Institute of Science in 2003, she was an assistant professor at the IIT Guwahati for 1 year. Her areas of specializations include geocell reinforcement, soil geosynthetic interactions, image-based characterizations, seismic response of reinforced soil structures, and rock engineering. She has so far supervised 15 PhD students. She has published more than 150 technical papers in international and national journals and conferences. Professor Madhavi Lada is the primary geotechnical consultant for the world's highest railway bridge being constructed in Jammu, India. She received the Teacher Extraordinary Award from the Builders Association of India and several national and international Best Paper awards. She is a member of the ISSM GE technical committees on soil structure interaction and retaining walls, geomechanics from micro to micro, and IGS technical committee on soil reinforcement. She is currently the editor-in-chief of Indian Geotechnical Journal published by Springer and an associate editor of Geotextiles and Geomembranes published by Elsevier. With this brief introduction, I would like to invite Professor Gali Madhavi Lada to deliver her SOAP lecture.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to be a part of this important conference. And my lecture topic is geosynthetics and retaining wall subjected to seismic shaking. I've been working in this area for the past 18 years since I joined the Indian Institute of Science. And it's my pleasure to take you through the journey of shaking table studies at IISc. This is the outline of my presentation. I will give you a brief introduction on shaking table studies, 1G physical modeling and geotechnical engineering, particularly in the context of retaining walls, and then some concepts of 1G modeling and shaking table, and in particular shaking table studies we are carrying out at Indian Institute of Science, and some important design considerations and credits. We all know why we build retaining walls. Anytime if we want to do a cutting and filling of an existing ground to either expand the freeway or to construct a new freeway or any load-bearing kind of a structure with a certain height, this will oppose the laws of gravity, because the height at which you are building this wall will be subjected to the gravitational forces of the mass which is being retained. So if the angle of repose at which soil is thought to be safe at that particular angle, if this is exceeded by the slope or the steepness of the retaining wall, usually we have failures. And even under static conditions, you have always a danger of failure in retaining wall, because you are always trying to retain a particular amount of soil which is under stress, and the stresses can be only increased due to external factors like surcharge pressures, live loads, and any other unknown factors. But particularly under seismic conditions, the danger of failure becomes even worse because we are imposing certain amount of horizontal shaking at the base, because of which the wall will try to slide or collapse. Now, coming to the static forces acting on a retaining wall, I am showing you a very, very simple example of a retaining wall where you have different kinds of forces acting. One of the major forces which act in a retaining wall is soil pressure. The soil which is being retained by the wall, it actually tries to push the facing of the wall. Because of that, you have lateral earth pressure acting. And typically, as per Rankine's theory, we assume the distribution of this pressure to be triangular. And if you want to find out the resultant force acting on the wall due to the soil pressure, we take the area of this triangle, half of base into height, and it acts at a height of h/3 from the base. And if you have some surcharge acting on the retaining wall, then the resultant will be a rectangular distribution with a magnitude equal to coefficient of earth pressure into the amount of surcharge, uniform surcharge pressure. And this is equal at all elevations, and the area of this rectangle gives you the resultant thrust due to the surcharge pressure. And if you have some live loads acting on the retaining wall, then you need to assume the Boussinesq, the R. Westergaard's stress distribution theories are there. We derive the earth pressure distributions below the live loads, and we compute the resultant thrust due to these live loads. And then you calculate the total pressure as a combination of all these pressures. Now, when we have the seismic forces, what extra force comes onto the retaining wall is the horizontal and vertical forces due to earthquake. Usually in a pseudostatic analysis, we take the horizontal pressure as kh into W, where kh is the horizontal seismic coefficient, W is the weight of the soil wedge, which is actually it's a failure wedge, active wedge, which we call. So, and the vertical force will be kV into W. kV is the coefficient of vertical acceleration. Now, what happens when you have a reinforced retaining wall? Particularly, why I am telling you this is, we are talking about reinforced retaining walls. If you do not have reinforcement, in most of the cases, these horizontal pressures, which are actually pushing the retaining wall forward, one due to soil pressure, one due to live load, another one due to the surcharge pressure, and on top you have this seismic force which is pushing the wall. And you should find a mechanism by which you need to hold this wall back. And this is possible due to, if you can actually include some tensile elements into the retaining wall in the form of reinforcement. And if you have layers of reinforcement embedded into the backfill, you can actually compute the total tensile force, which will be actually trying to push the retaining wall back into its original position. So this is where the reinforcement comes into picture for the seismic stability of a retaining wall. Now, how does an earthquake force act? Earthquake forces it's actually an inertial force. Since the structure, any structure is usually under stable equilibrium, and then you have this earthquake force coming and shaking it at the ground level. And the structure will have its own rigidity or inertia to oppose this movement. And because of this, the components of the structure are subjected to different levels of displacement. This is what we call inertial force effect. Now, to encounter or sustain this inertial force due to earthquake, the structure has to be as flexible as possible. If the structure is extremely rigid, then it will undergo enormous amounts of displacements, whereas if it is a flexible structure, the displacements will be limited, and the structure will have the flexibility to sustain the deformations. Now, this is a picture of a conventional type gravity retaining wall in Japan, which was damaged severely in 2007 because of an earthquake. Because conventional gravity retaining walls are extremely rigid structures, they will not be able to displace under the influence of earthquakes. They oppose the deformations. That is why they undergo brittle kind of failure. In this plot, I am trying to pictorially show you how a brittle failure and a ductile failure happens in an earthquake scenario. If a retaining wall is a very rigid structure, then it will collapse in a brittle way without much deformations. Whereas if you have a retaining wall which is flexible, the wall will undergo deformations, but since the wall is ductile, it will stay back in its original position. It will not undergo a collapse. So ductility is the key property for earthquake survival, and most of the reinforced retaining wall structures are extremely ductile compared to our conventional gravity type retaining walls. If you take a GRS wall is a short form for the geosynthetic reinforced soil wall. GRS wall reacts to earthquake in a very flexible manner. This is analogous to kind of ship floating on a wave. In a ocean or sea, if the wave is passing and there is the ship is passing and there is a huge wave, then we can think of this boat actually moving on the wave, and it moves along the wave. And when the wave recedes, it comes back to its equilibrium position. Similar thing happens in the geosynthetic reinforced soil wall. When there is an earthquake passing through the GRS wall, it actually flexes, undergoes deformations, but the deformations will be contained within the structure because it is extremely flexible structure. And once the earthquake passes, it will come back to its original position. So geosynthetic reinforced soil walls have main advantages of improved seismic performance and ease of construction, and also a lot of savings in cost because we are using polymers instead of cement and concrete. So many recent earthquakes show that geosynthetic reinforced soil walls have performed extremely well under seismic conditions. One such example is in the Kobe earthquake of 1995. There is a geogrid reinforced retaining wall which is shown in this picture, which is built for 300 meters long using geogrids, and you can see panel facing at the front. So in 1995, there is a devastating earthquake which hit this area, and you can see that all the surrounding buildings are collapsed, but the retaining wall, which is made with the geogrids, is completely safe. It has undergone very less damage during this earthquake. This witnesses the seismic performance of reinforced soil structures. And among the studies on seismic response of geosynthetic reinforced soil walls, you can have reduced scale model studies, including centrifuge and shaking table studies, field studies, and numerical studies. In this lecture, I will be concentrating only on the reduced scale model studies, that too on shaking table, which is available in our lab. So in a centrifuge, generally you have this NG conditions, because of which you can simulate the field stress conditions exactly in a laboratory model, because you have this acceleration at which the model will be rotating, which will create the centrifugal forces, because of which the stress conditions within the model will be increased several times to be equal to the stress conditions in a prototype. But in a shaking table model, you have 1G conditions. That is, you are conducting experiments in one gravity condition. So the stresses in the model will not be equal to the stresses in the prototype. To get the stresses in the prototype, you need to use some scaling laws so that you can actually extrapolate the results from the shaking table studies to field conditions. Centrifugal studies are very good because they're NG model test, but they also have some serious limitations, like the acceleration field may not be uniform within the model, and also there could be grain size effects which are affecting the performance. And also shaking table studies, as I already told, they are 1G model tests, but definitely there are more number of shaking table studies reported in the literature than the centrifuge test, because of the simple fact that you can create bigger models in shaking table compared to centrifuge. And also creation of model and managing the instrumentation of the models is much easier in a shaking table. All said and done, centrifuge modeling has its own advantage because you don't have to use any scaling factors like in shaking table studies. And the concept of physical modeling, explained by Zimi in 1995, we call exactly similar model is created in the lab when you three conditions are satisfied. One is you have geometric similarity, which means the linear dimensions are equally scaled. Kinematic similarity, in which the motions are exactly similar. Dynamic similarity, that means homologous parts of the systems, both in model and prototype, are they experience homologous net forces, which is possible if you have kinematic similarity and the equal similar mass distributions. So if you have this shaking table model studies, how do you create scaling laws so that the results from the shaking table model studies can be extrapolated to understand the performance of actual prototype structures in the field? There is this scaling factor. A length scaling factor can be defined as length of a linear dimension scaling factor, which is length of the model by length of the prototype. It's a very simple scaling, geometric scaling. See, if you want to create a similar scaling factor for force, then you go with the dimensional parameters, like force is gamma into V. So the force parameter would be gamma V of model by gamma P, that is prototype gamma into V of prototype. But here gamma should be same for model and prototype. That is one condition. So technically your V has dimensions of volume. V is volume. So volume has dimensions of a linear dimension cube. So the scaling factor should be multiplied 3 times on its own. So to get the force scaling factor. So this is how you create the scaling laws from the basic laws of physics and motion. And there is also a scaling law proposed by Rocha for stress-strain response of model and prototype. So Rocha has created two scaling factors, alpha for stress scaling and beta for strain scaling. If you have a stress-strain response under cyclic load for model and prototype, and the stress in the model and strain in the model are related by the parameter alpha, and stress in the model and stress in the prototype are related by alpha, and strain in the model and strain in the prototype are related by beta. But this has not become very famous because most of the times this is not such a straightforward linear difference in the scaling of stress and strain in model and prototype. So the other theory is proposed by Scott. This is a very, very interesting theory based on critical state of soils. A critical state or steady state of a soil is the state in which the soil will be undergoing deformation at constant effective stress, constant volume, and constant shear stress. So if you have such a critical state or steady state, and if you have a void ratio in the model and prototype managed in such a way that they are at equal difference between the steady state and the current state, then they both will have same stress strain response. This is a very interesting theory. If you can see this in the plot, you have this steady state, which is E log P prime, what we are plotting for the steady state line. And then the model and prototype are, the response is plotted exactly in parallel to the steady state line. And the difference between the void ratio of model and the steady state line and model and the prototype, a prototype and the steady state line is exactly same. So in such case, you will have the stress strain response of model same as the stress strain response of the prototype, which was proved by many other researchers in later days. So the most simplified scaling laws were proposed by EI in 1989. So these are based on the hysteresis response of model and prototype, and also based on the basic physics and motion, laws of motion. So here, these are the final scaling factors proposed by EI, where density, displacement, mass, force, strain, and all other parameters, including acceleration, frequency, damping, everything in the prototype is extrapolated to from the model using a scaling factor. Lambda is the linear scaling between model and prototype. So if you want to, when we are talking about reinforced retaining walls, it's also important to scale the stiffness of the reinforcement. it's not as straightforward as other parameters, because the reinforcement stiffness is governed by the strain at which we are calculating the stiffness, not by the ultimate tensile strength of the reinforcement, because the stresses within the reinforced retaining walls will be very, very less compared to the ultimate shear strength, shear stress to which the reinforced band can be subjected to. So we need to be very careful with the strain levels at which we are operating. So the modal scale stiffness can be obtained from the stiffness of the prototype divided by lambda square. Lambda is the linear scaling. So this is proposed by LMM and Bathurst in 2004. And one more important thing we need to consider while we are doing physical modeling using shaking table is creating a laminar container. Usually, if you carry out your model test in a rigid container, you have inherent problems, like there could be reflection of waves from at the boundaries, and there are side frictions which will come into your measurements of stresses and forces, displacements. And there is also resistance to the deformation of the soil. The soil will not be moving in its natural state inside a rigid container. To avoid these limitations, researchers have created laminar containers. These laminar containers are the containers in which the soil is free to move on its own accord, and the side walls will not create any friction to the movement of the soil. I will not say zero friction, but definitely it is much, much minimized compared to rigid containers. And there are also minimized boundary effects. And another important thing is, how do you select the ground motion in a shaking table study? People use sinusoidal motion, stepped wave, and different kinds of waves. And they also use the actual ground motion, which is captured from different earthquakes across the world. You can use any of these ground motions. And most popular form of ground motion is a sine sweep. In sine sweep, you subject the reinforced or any soil structure on the shaking table to a ground motion in which the frequency is continuously increasing. Initially, it starts with a very low value, low frequency, you can see in the picture, and it keeps on increasing until it reaches a very high frequency. In this way, you can also find out the fundamental frequency of the structure to which you are conducting the modal test. So this is the introduction. From here, I take it on to describing the ongoing research at IASC in this area. So we have carried out in our lab shaking table studies on different types of retaining walls, including wrap-faced, rigid-faced, modular block, geocell walls, and geosynthetic reinforced soil walls. I will just show you, for the completeness, I will just show you what are these different types of retaining walls. A wrap-faced retaining wall is a wall in which you do not need any additional facing. The reinforcement, either it is geotextile or a geonet or a geogrid, is wrapped around each lift of this retaining wall, so that it creates one complete layer of a retaining wall. You don't need additional facing. This acts like facing plus reinforcement. And a full height panel reinforced retaining wall is in which you have these concrete panels as facing. These are for the full height. Tatsuoka Tauhata from Japan have done extensive work on these types of retaining walls. And you have reinforcement inside, either grid or textile. So this is a full height panel reinforced wall. And modular block wall it consists of reinforcement inside and modular blocks which fit into each other because of their geometry. They fit into each other. They don't need any additional fixtures like in other segmental panel walls. Here you have each one sitting on its the subsequent layer, and final wall is created with the facing and reinforcement like this. And a geocell retaining wall is made up of geocell facing, where you have layers of geocell spread and filled with soil, and then retained backfill. And the facing has this stack of geocells, creating the entire facing for the wall. And it also has an advantage of you can grow a lot of vegetation on these pockets of geocells, so that you can cover this entire area and also provide additional reinforcement through the roots of these vegetation. Coming to our shaking table, it's a 1 meter by 1 meter shaking table, which can hold a load of 1 ton and frequency range 0.05 hertz to 50 hertz. And you can test up to 2G accelerations, and amplitude is plus or minus 200 millimeters. So we also have this laminar box design for this shaking table, which has these rectangular stacks of aluminum, hollow aluminum panels, which are very, very low weight panels. And they have in between each of these stacked panels, you have these roller bearings on which these panels can freely move, and you have a frame outside which contains this entire thing and which is fixed to the base of the shaking table top. And then since you have these roller bearings which you are seeing in this picture, the motion of these panels with respect to each other is very, very smooth. And you have the soil inside the retaining wall, inside this laminar box, moving in a free manner compared to rigid retaining wall. It is a one-dimensional shaking table, or 1 degree of freedom, so it can only move in the horizontal direction. There are some instrumentation which we are using, like accelerometers, pressure sensors, and strain gauges. These are all very common type, but the very interesting type of instrumentation we are using are ultrasonic displacement sensors. These do not touch the model, but they are at a distance from the model. They send ultrasonic sound pulses, and the sound pulses touch the moving object and comes back in a reflection. And based on the arrival time, you can find out the distance between the sensor and the moving object. So in a way, in a millisecond, you can take about 100 measurements of the deformations of the wall, which is very important in dynamic testing and shaking table studies. This is a schematic diagram of the wrap-faced model wall we have created. You have like these stacks, like I already explained to you, and you have pressure sensors which are measuring the pressure inside the wall, and accelerometers A1, A2, A3, where you measure the amplification of acceleration at different levels, ultrasonic displacement sensors placed away from the facing. And the procedure is very simple. The construction, I'm just showing you some pictures, like you just, geotextile is used for reinforcement, so woven geotextile. You keep one layer of this geotextile, and on top you fill the sand up to the height to which you are trying to fill one lift, and embed your pressure sensors. What you are seeing here is pressure sensor at the required elevation, and accelerometer. This is also embedded inside the soil. And then you finish the one layer of, you wrap it around carefully. The textile is wrapped around the soil to a certain length. And sand pluviation technique is used to fill the soil so that you get the uniform relative density within the model. And this is a finished wrap-faced model. The yellow ones, what you are seeing here, are the ultrasonic displacement sensor. And some results, I'm not going into the details. You can see the effect of relative density. As you are increasing the relative density from 37% to 87%, the horizontal displacement of the wall is coming down from 50 millimeters to almost like 5-6 millimeters. This test is carried out at a very high earthquake scenario, I mean, where your frequency is 3 hertz and acceleration is 0.2 g. And to simplify the presentation of amplifications, acceleration amplifications, we have used RMS amplification factor. This is root mean square acceleration, a very simple parameter. You have these so many number of cycles in which you are computing the acceleration, measuring the acceleration, and you have positive and negative accelerations. To average out the acceleration for the overall test at any elevation, what you do is take the square of the acceleration and integrate it for the entire 0 to PD, the duration. So you get the square acceleration, and then mean of it, that is dividing by the total duration, gives you the mean. And then taking a root, because you squared it, you take a root, so that you have an absolute value of average acceleration which represents the average acceleration to which the model is subjected to. Now, this is the picture which shows you the effect of surcharge pressure both on displacements and acceleration amplifications. Acceleration amplifications varied from about 1.75 to between 1.5, and displacements with the increase in surcharge from 0.5 to 1.5, you have decreased displacements. As you increase the surcharge, your stiffness on the top, you are actually putting a rigid boundary on the top, and you are also increasing the vertical force. So the horizontal displacements are reducing. And also with a number of reinforcing layers, you have like 3, 4, 6 number of layers. You can see that the deformations are changing from 90 mm to almost like less than 10 millimeters. So the effect of reinforcement is very clearly seen in this picture. And usually when we are designing a reinforced retaining wall, the general guideline is the reinforcement length should be 0.6 times the height so that you avoid pull-out failure. But under seismic conditions, the 0.6 parameter will not work. This is what's shown in this plot. When your reinforcement length is 0.5 times h or 0.7 times h and 1 h, you can see the difference in the displacements and the earth pressures inside the wall. If you have, even when at 0.7 times h, your deformations are as high as 85 millimeters in the model. When you use length equal to the height of the retaining wall, you are reducing the deformations to much lesser value. So the static and dynamic design of retaining walls can be completely different in terms of reinforcement. And then this picture shows you the effect of frequency with different frequency values, how the accelerations and displacements are varying. The other set of model tests are on rigid faced walls. Here, instead of wrap, we have a rigid wall. I will show you a photograph which makes it more clear. You have stacks of steel panels which are rectangular and hollow, and these are actually stacked inside guide rods. These are steel guide rods in which these are actually pushed into, so that you create a full height rigid wall which is extremely rigid and not flexible at all. So inside you create the retaining wall. You can either have reinforcement or you need not have reinforcement. The comparison between unreinforced retaining wall and reinforced retaining wall with the variation in the relative density of the backfill soil is shown here at an acceleration of 0.1 g and 1 hertz. So very moderate earthquake we can call. So you can see that the unreinforced retaining walls, when you are 37% relative density, the deformations are very less, 2 to 3 mm. Even though the wall is unreinforced, since it's a rigid faced wall, your deformations are not as much as the wrap faced walls. But when you have this reinforcement, your horizontal displacements are much less. They are less than 1 mm. They are almost nil when you have a rigid faced retaining wall. This is an excellent method of constructing a reinforced wall. Most of the Japanese retaining walls are rigid faced full height retaining walls with geocrit reinforcement inside. And this is another picture showing the accelerations, how they are varying in a rigid faced wall. And comparing the displacements of different types of walls, wrap faced, rigid faced, and rigid reinforced. Rigid faced reinforced retaining walls are much better in their seismic performance because the displacements are much low, almost insignificant. And this is the effect of shaking frequency again. And reinforcement type also, we have used different types of reinforcement. Since this is a reduced scale model, the reinforcement stiffness also has to be reduced. So PX is a biaxial grid, UA is an uniaxial grid, a geonet and a weak geotextile. All these different types of materials are used and their performance is shown here. So unreinforced soil retaining wall has the maximum deformations, whereas all reinforced retaining walls showed excellent performance in terms of reduced deformations. And segmental retaining walls, we have actually casted these modular blocks in our lab with reinforcement. You can see that there is a lip here. So which allows for easy fitting of successive blocks of modular concrete blocks, one onto the other, so that you create a facing for it. You can read about the details of this in our papers if you want more details how to create these modular blocks and retaining wall. GeoGrid is used as reinforcement, and this is a finished retaining wall. And interesting results are obtained because here we are testing modular block and then comparing it with unreinforced and also rigid faced walls. Here we are comparing 2-layer and 3-layer modular facing walls. With the 3-layer modular facing walls with 47% relative density, that is very less relative density, you can actually bring down the deformations from 15 mm to almost like 2 to 3 mm, which is excellent. And
Professor Lata,
yes.
sorry to interrupt you. Can you please finish by 5 minutes? Is it
Excellent.
possible?
Sure,
Okay,
sure,
thank you.
definitely.
Thank you.
So the next set of tests are on geocell retaining walls. These are, I already explained, you have these geocell layers used as facing and filled with soil. The advantage of geocell reinforcement is that it is not only providing additional benefits through friction interlocking, but also provides all-round confinement, membrane effect, and also the anchorage effect because of its geometry. So the soil within the geocell is always in a state of all-round confinement, so that the entire facing of the retaining wall is in a state of like stress all the time, which is good all-round confinement, which opposes the any lateral forces acting on the facing. So these are models of retaining walls created using GeoNet. It's a very weak material. You can pull it apart using your hand. These retaining walls are constructed with very weak reinforcement so that you can actually reduce, you can use the scaling for reinforcement stiffness. So some typical results, one interesting result is when you have rigid facing, the retaining wall movement is almost like you have displacement continuously increasing with wall height, whereas when you use geocell facing, the reinforcement allows for the adjustment of displacement at every elevation so that the final displacement at any level is much, much less compared to a rigid faced wall. Also, it has an enhanced base width and it also has a set off when you are constructing it, which gives you additional geometric advantage of the retaining wall, which provides resistance against sliding and overturning in retaining walls. We've also created geocells using PVC, which is a very, very weak material. The normal PVC material, which we use as overhead projector slides, used photolamination technique to make these geocells. You can see comparison of performance of PVC and high density polyethylene geocells. So now how do you extrapolate these results to field retaining walls? I'm just showing you a guideline table where if your model has a scaling factor of like lambda L, say for example, your model dimension is 1, the dimension of the prototype is 10. So that is the linear scale. And the unit weight will be same in both model and prototype. And frequency of the model is whatever you need to use the scaling factor proposed by EI. The frequency of the model FM, so the prototype will have 0.17 FM as per this equation computed. Similarly, stress will be same in both models. Stress is like sigma m here. You have the model factor as lambda L. So this is 10 times sigma m. That is exactly stress is like stress in the prototype will be the scaling factor into the stress in the model. And the duration is 5.62 times the duration of the model. Displacement is 10 times the displacement in the model, and stiffness is 100 times the stiffness of the model. So these are the parameters calculated as per EI scaling factors, and similar, these factors are used to give guidelines and recommendations on where these parameters can be used and what would be the displacements, frequency, duration in the prototype retaining walls compared to the model ones. As a closing statement, I would like to say that shaking table tests provide important insights into the seismic response of reinforced retaining walls. They are not foolproof. You need to be extremely careful with your scaling, quality control, materials what we are using, their properties and everything. When you do a perfect test, then these results provide important clues for understanding the pressure distribution deformation. But at the same time, be a disclaimer you need to add that you cannot directly extrapolate the results of shaking table tests to the seismic response of actual structures in the field. You have to be very careful when we are using these results. All credits go to my students. My first PhD student, Murali Krishna, who is a professor at IIT Tirupati now, and Santana Kumar, my MTech student, and Manju, another PhD student of mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Lata, for a very interesting talk. Actually, we heard a lot about the different types of retaining walls, very practical problem. And yes, before going further, my comments, I would open the floor for questions from the audience, and I would request Dr. Anil to, if you can help me with the questions.
Sure. Sure. So from the audience, if there are any specific questions, now it is open for discussion.
Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am.
Yes, yeah. Please.
Ma'am, have you modeled anything with this using contact element or contact interfaces between the geogrids and soil? So, is there any modeling being done with this?
Yes, we did model these wrap-faced and rigid-faced retaining walls, what I have shown in the shaking table. So there is this, we have used the FLAC to model the retaining walls, used interface elements. That paper is available. I think it was published in ASE.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I think there are no more questions. Thank you very much, ma'am,
Thank you,
for your
Anil.
nice lecture, and it will be definitely useful for many of the researchers. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So can I add a few things, points?
Yeah, please, sir, please.
Professor Lata, it's a lot of work, I understand, but I would like to know a little bit more about if you have done any economical analysis. You have the different types of walls. So, what is your suggestion, under what conditions which wall would be preferred? If you could throw some light on this.
Yes, I mean, we have not particularly carried out any economic analysis of these walls, but definitely with the laboratory models what we have created, I can say that the planar reinforced retaining walls are the cheapest compared to your rigid faced walls. Any wrap faced walls are very cheap, but their deformations are not in the tolerable levels in most of the conditions. So use only for temporary structures. You can't use it for permanent structures. So the ones which we can use for permanent structures are geogrid walls, generally full height walls, or geocell walls, or modular block walls. So comparatively, rigid block, the full height walls are very expensive because you use concrete facing, and also the connectors and the reinforcement also is heavy in those walls. But they are very good in terms of their performance. But geocell walls are comparatively expensive compared to the regular walls, but they are much cheaper compared to the full height walls, and they give same additional benefits like rigid faced walls. But their height is limited. You can't construct them for like more than 10 meters. That's the limitation.
Thanks for this elaboration. There's another point. Because on your test, you had this rigid bottom below your retaining wall. What if we want to see what is the situation if we have some soft soil below your retaining wall? Have you done any kind of study with respect to
No. Actually, because the shaking table has the top. So we are constructing the structure on top of the shaking table. It's a kind of a table. So there is no way that we can have a soft bottom, because it has to transfer that movement from the actuator to the structure. So that is the only way. You cannot actually have a softer. I understand your question. In the real field, you will not have any of these rigid boundary coming in the way of your wave, which is transmitted from the source to the structure. But in here, definitely we have the limitation, because you are trying to create this horizontal motion at the base. So the base is rigid always in a shaking table test.
Yeah, but have you done any numerical study? Numerical study is possible with.
Yes, we
model.
can, but we have not done. Yeah, honestly, we have not done any such study.
Okay, well, Professor Lata, I'm not sure if there is any more questions. If not, yes, I would like to give, I would request everybody to give you a big hand. I don't know how to give it here on the virtual platform, but it
Thank
was
you
very
so much.
nice to meet you and hear from you. And actually, we will now, okay, so
Thank you, ma'am.
we like to go to our next phase of this session. Maybe I would like take the assistance of Dr. O'Neill, who is always with me, and we are having internet problems, quite frequently and being disconnected. So I would put the main charge on you, and maybe I will be there beside you.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. No issue.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Dr. O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so now we will come to the next phase of this parallel technical session. And it is my actually great pleasure to welcome all the delegates for their presentation in the 24th technical parallel session of the International Conference on Recent Advances in Geotechnical Earthquake Engineering and Soil Dynamics. So there are total of 5 presentations, and we will be calling one by one. The total time given for presentation is 8 minutes, and there will be discussion, question answer session after all the presentations are over. So now I will call upon the first speaker, Sibayan Biswas. The topic is Cation Foundation response during liquefaction induced lateral spreading by Sibayan Vishwas from IIT Bombay. So may I request him to kindly share his PPT? I think the speaker isn't available, so we will go to the next by Kamachi P is available. Okay. I think Ahmad Bilal is available. So we will call upon.
Yes, sir, I'm
Yeah, okay. We will call upon Dr. Ahmad Bilal from Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh, for the presentation on nonlinear analysis of base isolated building having optimized number of base isolators. So can you please share your PPT and start the presentation?
Presentation is on nonlinear analysis of base isolated building having optimized number of base isolators. So here in this study, I've designed a base isolation system for a framed building, and nonlinear time history analysis has been performed. Then the response has been compared with the fixed base building. So the response has been studied in terms of base shear, roof displacement, story shear, and base level displacements. So in addition to this, I've also performed a cost-effective optimization approach, where the number of base isolators have been reduced, and the base isolators have not been provided beneath every column, so that to achieve a number which gives the minimum cost of base isolators. so we know that base isolation is one of the most efficient and economical structural control measure. So it dissipates the seismic energy without damage to the superstructure. So although the behavior of the isolation devices is non-linear, linear analysis is commonly used to design most base isolated structures. So in this study, the base isolators that we have designed are lead laminated rubber bearings, and they have been designed as per the procedure given in the book written by T.K. Datta sir for the multi-storied buildings, and the response have been studied. So the performance of the structure has been checked for different number of isolators using linear analysis and non-linear pushover analysis. So this optimum number has been found out based on the least cost of base isolators. So this is the structure that we have taken. This is, and we've used grade M25 grade concrete and Fe415 grade steel. So this structure was lying in seismic zone 4. So we have modeled it using SAP 2000, and beams and columns were modeled using frame elements, while the base isolators were modeled using nonlinear link elements. Nonlinear time history analysis was performed to compare the response of fixed base building and the base isolated building. The time history analysis that we took was the El Centro time history analysis, and the scaling was done for PGA to 0.25 to 43. So this building, as we have seen here, has 20 columns. We can see that there are 20 columns. So in this approach to optimize the cost, we have reduced the number of base isolators used, and this we have gradually reduced 2 at a time from below the columns. So this process was continued until when we reduced any further number of isolators, the structure became unstable. So when we reduced the isolators from beneath the columns or a few columns, then we had to provide a base slab, a thick base slab, and beneath so that the base remains rigid, and even if less number of isolators were used, so we can perform this analysis. So then we perform linear as well as non-linear analysis for each case to ensure that the performance of structure has not been compromised by reducing the number of isolators. So the comparison of total cost of isolator used in each case has been made based on the cost of isolators. These are the results for time history analysis. So this is the El Centro time history, can be seen here. This was the El Centro time history which we have taken for the analysis. Here the base shear has been compared for fixed base building and base isolated building. Then we compared the plinth level acceleration as well. Also plinth level displacement can also be compared, because when the building is fixed, we don't have plinth level displacement substantial. But when we use base isolators, the plinth level displacements increase. So top story acceleration has also been compared. We can see that the top story acceleration was much more when the building was fixed. So also the top story displacements have been compared. So here we can see that the top story displacements are comparable. Like we have the total displacements at the top story for fixed base building and base isolated buildings are same or approximately same. They do not have much difference. That is because in fixed base building, the story shear reduces, or the inter-story drift reduces. So we do not have, but the total displacement at the top may remain same. So here, when the isolators were removed from these two locations, which are shown in the figure, so the cost was found to be least. So here we need to know that when a base isolator is designed, then there are two types of cost involved. One is the die cost, which is for a particular type of base isolator, we will need one die. So we have that one die cost, and the cost of that base isolator. So there are two types of cost. So when we try to optimize the cost, we try that the base isolators which have comparable capacities should be made of the same size, so that the die cost reduces. So the details of the cost are given in table 1 and 2. The total approximate cost is given. So I would like to show. So here is the summary of the cost of base isolators. So when we use 20 number of base isolators, the sizes are given. So the total cost in Indian rupees, these cost we obtained from one of the retail merchants. So it came out to be 57 lakhs 40,000. So, but this cost is for the base isolators and the die cost, not installation cost, and the other costs are not included in this. So similarly, when we went to 18 isolators, so the cost reduced to 45 lakhs. Now, when we further reduce the isolators, like we went to 16 number of isolators, then the cost increased. Then again for 14 isolators and 12 isolators. When we try to reduce the number of isolators to 10, then the building was not becoming stable. So that's why we stopped the analysis there and then. So now we could see that 21% cost of the base isolators could be reduced by performing such types of this type of optimization and performing such analysis. Here, this for nonlinear analysis as well as linear analysis was performed for each case, so that we can ensure that when we are reducing the number of isolators, we are not compromising with the performance of the structure. So here we can see that the performance remains nearly same even when we reduce the base isolators. So this is the story drift has been shown in the first figure, and displacement for each case has been shown in the second figure. So this is the figure which shows the results for pushover analysis, when pushover analysis was performed for each case of isolators. And it has been seen that if number of isolators is reduced and the remaining isolators are appropriately designed for the new loads, then there is no significant change in the linear and nonlinear response of the structure. Also, but the cost can be reduced substantially. So we can also perform much more rigorous analysis, including reinforcement cost, installation cost, etc., so that we get the exact estimate of the savings. So now here I would conclude that the results of nonlinear time history analysis show that the base shear of the building has reduced by 54% on using base isolators, and consequently the forces in the members of the building were also reduced. Thus, it can be said that base isolation should be used in the buildings instead of conventional earthquake resistant design for higher performance levels like life safety and immediate occupancy. A cost-effective approach of designing the base isolation system has been presented here, in which the number of base isolators has been optimized to get the most optimal combination of base isolators. It is a general practice to use base isolators beneath every column of a building, but it has been shown in the present paper that some same level of performance can be achieved using lesser number of base isolators if they are appropriately designed. The results of the linear and nonlinear analysis have been presented in the paper to support this inference. Thus, it can be concluded that for designing a base isolation system for any building, an optimization study should be conducted to know the combination which gives the least cost. So these are some of the references. Thank you very much. Now, if there are certain questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. Please be in the session. The questions session should be after all the presentations are over. So
Okay.
I request your present till the end. So the next topic is parametric study on overturning moment ratio of buildings with shallow foundation for tsunami loading by Hema Malini from CSIR ACRC Chennai. So you can share your screen and start the presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to present a topic about parametric study and overturning moment ratio of buildings with shallow foundation for tsunami loading. As we know, tsunami is the this is a major, it's like a major disaster. So as we know, tsunamis causes is a huge tendency to cause huge losses in terms of casualty, economic loss, also destruction of coastal environment. So in this study, we are going to see about overturning of a building with respect to tsunami loading. As we reported in literatures, there are coming to building, there will be a many losses with respect to building. There is a structural and non-structural failures of a building identified due to tsunami. So in this present study, we are going to see about overturning ratio of a building with respect to identified parameters. So based on the parametric study, we proposed one model for calculation of overturning ratio. So the literature surveys has been carried out for this study. So for this, from this concept, so already the literature has been carried out. The overturning and slicing of foundation from superstructure during 2011 earthquake. So from this, we have identified three major parameters. Here also the Penang and Kochi, they reported 5 reinforced concrete building and 1 RCC framed buildings in the town of Onagawa are getting overturned. And these studies has been read out, and this literature has been taken for the studies. Then coming to overturning, how the overturning of a building happens. Overturning of a building is due to the instantaneous action of hydrodynamic and buoyancy forces. So this is since tsunami is the instantaneous action of forces, it hits the building and the building gets overturned. So the overturning moment majorly causes due to buoyancy forces and the hydrodynamic forces. Coming to hydrodynamic force, it is a dynamic force, and it's also a lateral force. It's a building in a horizontal direction. It tends to overturning the building in the horizontal direction. Then coming to buoyancy force, it is a force. It is a uplift vertical force acting under the foundation. This force acting through the center of gravity of the building. This is also tendency causing the overturning. This force together acting and giving overturning of a building. Coming to resisting moment, the resisting moment only the self weight of the building. Since there is no loading on the structure, only the self weight of the building taken as a resisting moment. This figure shows typical forces acting on the building. Coming to for this study, we have considered tsunami force from FEMA 646/2012. So this is a guideline for a design of a structure from a vertical evacuation from tsunami. So this FEMA code considered many forces for tsunami, like hydrostatic loading, debris loading, and buoyancy forces, uplift forces, and hydrodynamic and buoyancy forces. Among these forces, the major forces, hydrodynamic and buoyancy forces, are the major forces causing the overturning. Coming to overturning and resisting moment. Overturning moment, the moment due to hydrodynamic and buoyancy forces, and the resisting moment due to only self weight of the building. So from this we calculated the overturning ratio of a building, and we plotted graphs, and the parametric study has been carried out. So coming to parametric study, we identified 3 parameters as a cause for overturning of a building. First one is the residual aspect ratio. Then next one is the indentation depth, then height of the building. These are the major 3 parameters influencing the overturning of a building. So this figure shows typical plan considered for our controlled study for this parametric study, and for this control study, the plan considered as 8 meter by 8 meter. 5 housing buildings have been considered with respect to 1 to 5 stories. Each height of each story is taken as 3 meter. For this plan, we have carried out the structural analysis of this building with the seismic loads. So the loads considered for the control studies, like these loads considered from the IS 456/2000. So we consider this building located in Zone 3. zone 3, we taken as a zone seismic zone factor as 0.16. Since it is a residential, we consider as a residential building, importance factor has been taken 1 and response reduction factor 3. Structural design and load combination as considered as per IS 456/2000. From this analysis, we have tabulated the structural details of the building. So this table shows dimensions of beams and columns arrived by analysis. For all the buildings, we taken as thickness of the slab as 125 mm, and the thickness of the since we carried out the study for a shallow foundation, we considered rack foundation. So for a different story of a building, so the thickness of the foundation will vary according to that. So with this dimensions and influenced parameters, we calculated overturning ratio, and we compared this with the influenced parameters. These following studies has been carried out. So we are going to see about influenced parameters. First one is the residual aspect ratio, and how this parameter is going to affect the overturning of a building. So in this parameter, CD equal to 1. This means when there is no water entering into the building. So this means CD equal to 1. We consider it is like an empty box. When CD equal to 0, these two are the extreme cases. Within that, we have considered 0.2, 0.4, 0.8 like that. So with this, with this parameters, how the overturning of a building varies, we are going to see. So in this, from this, when CD equal to 1 means no water. So there is a maximum chance of overturning of a building. So if the CD value is less, there is a less chance of overturning. From this study, then out of 18 cases, 9 cases of are having a 50% chance of getting overturning of a building when CD equal to 6. So likewise, there will be when CD equal to 1, there will be maximum chance of overturning. So we found 14 cases of buildings are getting overturned out of 18. So from this, CD equal to 1 is very vulnerable. Then we found maximum value of overturning equal to 2.18 for a 2-story building with a 12.5 meter indentation depth. So the indentation depth will be more, means there will be more chance of overturning. So the figure shows the importance of the CD values. So from this graph, we came to know CD equal to 1 is very vulnerable, and like that, if CD value is less, means there is a less chance of overturning. So from this figure, we came to know. Next parameters we're going to see indentation depth. So indentation, in this study we considered 4 indentation depth. Indentation depth means the height of seismic wave, that is hit the building. So we take it as typical indentation depth for this study. 5 meters, 7.5 meter, 10 and 12.5 meters are considered. So the variation of here we are going to see about how the R will be affecting with the CD values. So from this, when R equal to this also shows when indentation depth is more, there is a more chance of overturning. So 72% of overturning of a building is for 18 cases out of 13 cases are overturned. So this graph shows. So from this graph, we predict the variation will be linear for the CD and OR value for a given
Hema Malini,
indentation depth.
can you try to wind up in 1 to 2 minutes?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the height of the building. So with respect to heights of the building also, more height of the building with the more height of indentation gives more overturning. So this graph shows for a small building with the highest indentation depth, it will be more overturning. So from this parametric study, we are fitted on the model has been fitted for estimation of overturning ratio. So for this model, we have taken coefficient of correlation of the fit is 0.985 and coefficient of determination 0.97. Root mean square error fit is 0.0972. So this is the validation of the model proposed for OR. So from the study, I'm going to conclude this. So the variation of overturning ratio of a building. So for this, identify parameters are studied. So based on this, we are proposed one model. This model has been used for the evaluative preliminary used for preliminary evaluation of overturning ratio of building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hema Malini.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so now we will move to the next presentation. The topic is a comparative study on predictive capability of different SSI models by Monu Lal Barnwal from IIT Kanpur.
Good morning, everybody. This is Manuel Bernal, and my topic of the presentation is a comparative study on predictive capability of different SSI models. So, as you know that everything you do experiment has to be simulated well, and this has to be there are different approaches to simulate it. So you can see that in SSI we have so we will be considering a continuum model or a discrete Winkler based model. So with the earthquake, there are many building damages induced, and you can see in the past also every earthquake has several SSI effect damages which can be seen. So these earthquake induced ground shaking affects the shallow foundation, and this leads to failure, different types of failure. So the cyclic degradation of the soil leads to the bearing capacity failure of the foundation. Larger horizontal force it is initiated by the earthquake, so it leads to foundation sliding or overturning of the building. Soil liquefaction can result in large settlement or tilting of the building, while softening of failure can lead to foundation force or step. So these are some of the pictures from the ground failure reduction Kokili earthquake in 1999. So you can see the settlement. There are heaps of the ground. The ground is lifted up, or the building is tilted. That depends on the HYB ratio of the building. So these are some of the failures of the steel structures during the Christchurch earthquakes. So this you can see that there are cracks throughout the buildings. So these has to be studied and modeled efficiently, and so soil structure interaction is needed. So to study the soil structure interaction, it is mainly has two aspects: inertial interaction, which takes into account the effect of flexibility and energy dissipation of the supporting medium on the system responses. So it mainly deals with the period, mode shapes, and the damping properties of the system. While kinematic interaction that affects the deals with the effect of structure on the characteristics of the ground motion, that is the field motion or the foundational motion. So a field motion is a motion where there is no structure. The wave propagates to the ground surface, and whatever effects it has on the ground surface is called field motion, while the foundation input motion, there is also foundation. How the structures behave with the wave, what are the characteristics of the ground motion, how it changes. That is simulated with kinematic interaction. So mainly the settlement, sway, sliding, behavior can be. So these can be modeled with two approaches: direct approach, that is full modeling of the soil foundation of the structure, that is a continuum FEM approach, or a substructure approach where we transfer the wave to the soil surface, and then we model it with the springs. So springs are used to represent the exercise, and it is being modeled with Winkler based approach. So there are many uncertainty while modeling. So generally the soil structure and modeling uncertainty modeling uncertainty, like modeling with the geometry, element type, mesh type. The choice of material model requires skills and literatures to judge the analysis type and loading condition. So while you build a model, you need to select the model properties, material models, interface properties, use of field boundary condition that can be simulated to fixed, discrete, Winkler, reflective, or viscous based boundary condition. So there are many boundary conditions which we can simulate, and it depends on the type of the model which we are analyzing. So different kind of approaches are to be used to solve the solved problem, like microelement model, discrete model, or containment for different base boundary conditions. So use of various sort of interfaces while modeling, like soil structure interfaces, soil interfaces, or structure footing interfaces, etc. are required. So if any other materials or interfaces are used, like geogrid or something, then we have to model that also. So the contact between all the elements has to be well simulated, and it has many uncertainty. So choice of loading conditions, so how it is, whether it is static, how the loads are applied, whether it is the constant load or a linear load, and how it is to be analyzed. In dynamic analysis also we see the transient, uh, how transient wave loads are introduced. So so here we have done a sec table test, and this is the sec table, this is the base of the sec table, and you already know this is actuator, and these are various laminas. Madhvi ma'am has also shown. So this is the structure, and this is filled with soil with a particular relative density, and all the instrumentation, these are loads. So so this is generally Ganga sand, which properties are given here. So it is instrumented with almost 90 sensors, and all the sensors were calibrated, and then the responses are found out. And this has been modeled with different types of approaches. This is a discrete Winkler based model, in which in this so that model is a prototype as a model scale, and it is a has a model scale of 10. So this has a prototype to model to prototype ratio of 10. So this is 0.6, this is 0.3. So in original scale it will be 6 meter and 3 meter of the column height. And this has been modeled with ISMB. Beams have been modeled with ISMB 500, while columns have been modeled with ISMB 600. And these are the properties of soil, footing, and structure. And for discrete based models, we generally use springs, and in terms of px, qz, and tz, where px defines the passive resistance of the footing of the soil, and tz is defines the or represents the frictional contact between the soil and the footing, while qz is the represent the bearing capacity of the footing. So these are different ratios which we defined when we put a spring. So this is the k mid by k end ratio. This is the stiffness ratio which we provide at the end and the at the middle. End length ratio, what is the length of the spacing between this, you know? So these are different ratio we provide. So the second approach we have used as a continuum viscous model or continuum rigid model. So these are continuum models, and in this what we model the soil as a continuum continuum quad element model with pressure dependent multi-yield, which is available in OpenSys. So all these models have been done in OpenSys. This is a framework, 2D framework, which comprises 2D FEM framework, where you have flexibility of doing simulating a model in your terms. So so the model is again simulated with here equal degree of freedom. So and for viscous base, we have replaced the fixity of this base boundaries and side boundaries with the viscous dashboards. While for rigid base, it is fixed with both direction here also. So so these are a stage analysis procedure is developed, and with this stage analysis, firstly a soil domain, a soil profile height, and a soil constitutive model parameter and weight of the soil is defined.
Yeah,
and
can you try to wind up?
Time is, so I will take five minutes more. Can I
5
take
minutes, please? Too much. Maybe you can try to wind up in 2 minutes.
okay? So in
Yeah, you can
terms
take
of
2 to 3 minutes. That's fine.
okay. So a mesh is defined, then the boundary condition, then the fixity, and then the structure is put. So applying a structure weight and vertical stage analysis is done. Then all these boundaries fixities are removed, and the viscous dashpot or the fixed whatever boundary conditions we apply for rigid base or the compliant base. So in rigid base we apply the motion in terms of displacement, while in compliant base we apply the motion in terms of velocity. So uh, so this was the input motion which I put, and it was frequency scaled and amplitude scaled to provide to get into the prototype. So I found out that eigenvalue analysis was compared with the sec table analysis, and almost 6.7% increase was there for discrete Winkler, while continuum was 12%, and we also found that for peak acceleration and peak displacement, we uh, we get that the continuum viscous model was approximately similar to the experiment. So you can see this in table that for the peak displacement it was 14.53, and for the sec table displacement it was 15.64. Similarly for the peak acceleration also it was 0.15 and it was 0.17, while peak moment was 36, and it was very less, but in continuum reflective it was more due to the trapping of waves. So I believe that there were tapping of waves, and that's why this has leads to this large movement, so large movement. So these were the conclusions. So eigenvalue analysis shows an increase of about 7.2% in the fundamental pair when foundation flexibility is introduced using soil column, discrete Winkler base to continuum rigid base or continuum viscous base. As the flexibility of the model is increased, discrete Winkler base to continuum viscous base, the base moment is decreased. However, CRB has a very large moment due to trapping of waves in the soil. The effect of SSI modeling and boundary conditions is significant, which increases the displacement demand of the model. With the CVV model, the peak displacement and peak acceleration are predicted accurately for the sec table experiment. So it was better to predict the sec table experiment with the dashpot, viscous dashpot model. So these are the references. Thank you. Any question, please?
Thank you, Monulal Barnwal. Now we will go to the next presentation. Numerical simulation of soil tunnel interaction under surface blast loading. The speaker is Jagriti Mandal from VNIT Nagpur. So Jagriti, can you
Yes,
please
sir.
share your PPT?
Good evening, everyone. I am Jagriti Mandal, and I'll be presenting my paper titled Numerical Simulation of Soil Tunnel Interaction Under Surface Blast Loading. So, the main focus of my research work at this moment is to simulate the contact between the geomaterial and the underground structure, that is tunnel. So, problem is modeling this interface is quite complicated because all of the complexity involved in it. There's relative translation there, then relative rotation of the surface in contact. Along with that, we have to maintain the load transfer from either soil to structure or structure to soil depending on the loading condition. If we want to understand in a simple way what really happens in the interface between an underground structure and soil, we can refer to this typical shear stress clip curve. If we divide this deformation process occurring here into three stages, we have bond stage, bond failure stage, friction sliding stage. So initially the bond takes the lead and it bears the load applied on the interface. We can see the increase in the shear stress in the initial stages, and it reaches the maximum capacity of the interface. During this particular stage, there's a small finer deformation which could be either because of slip or opening of the two interacting surfaces. When the shear stress exceeds the maximum shear capacity of the interface, the strength, bond strength starts degrading, and this marks the bond failure stage where the friction in between the interface starts contributing towards the whole procedure. We can still see some kind of residual bond strength here, but as the damage increases in between the interface, it gradually diminishes to zero, which marks again the friction sliding stage. Herein, the shear stress is completely due to the friction, and the slip increases at a constant residual shear stress, that is this particular shear stress. The problem is like how to numerically simulate this entire mechanism simultaneously. So coming back to my problem is why I have taken surface blast loading instead of internal blast loading. Because when we have an underground structure, there's like two blast scenario depending on the location of explosion with respect to underground structure. It could be internal explosion or it could be external, surface, subsurface. So I have taken surface blast loading. So when this explosion is internal, the shock wave, it interacts with the structure first and then it gets transmitted with the geomaterial. And alternatively, when the explosion is external, that is surface or subsurface, the shock wave, it propagates to the geomaterial and then it reaches the structure. So the entire soil structure interaction, it changes depending on the relative location of the explosion. Again, we have another theory, that is a stress wave. When it travels from a softer material to a comparatively stiffer material, it gets amplified. Softer material, that is of course the geomaterial, soil, and then the stiffer material, that is the lining, concrete basically. We have reinforced concrete normally used for underground structural lining. Alternatively, when the shear stress, when the stress wave, it travels from a stiffer material to the softer material, it weakens. That is why I have taken surface blast loading, because it is traveling from a softer material to a stiffer material. Again, the SSI becomes really important when the external explosion occurs in a soft or a saturated soil, because it becomes further soft and we have multiple other problems like blast, soil liquefaction and all. So coming back to the problem, again, if it is a nuclear explosion or there is a high yield near field explosion, the SSI can be completely neglected because the stress field across the entire domain, it is uniform and the relative motion of structure and the surrounding soil is almost negligible. So we can neglect the SSI part. But when the explosion is of low yield, there's attenuation of shock wave across the space, and then the stress field, it also varies. So there's a relative motion between the structure and the surrounding soil. So it becomes complex because of the varying stress field. Simulating this particular soil structure interface, we have to take care of those three stages I have discussed before, and this should happen simultaneously. Furthermore, realistic load transfer should be there between the contact. Right now we have contact methods, but they don't fulfill the entire requirements what we need for this particular problem. Among these contact methods, right now I have used three methods, that is the shade node method, then thin layer element method, and then the contact friction method. In the shade node method, the adjacent nodes, that is the nodes from the soil part and the structure parts, as we can see here, they are merged together, and thus we are assuming that the contact is completely rigid in between the tunnel lining and the soil. And for this particular problem, I have used LS-Dyno to simulate the entire problem, and LS-Dyno provides a keyword constant Lagrangian in solids. What it does is like when we are simulating the entire problem, we are defining the tunnel part using Lagrangian element formulation, and we are defining the soil part as ALE, arbitrary Eulerian Lagrangian. Arbitrary Lagrangian Eulerian element formulation. So using this particular keyword, we can define the contact between these two parts. Then the second method is the thin layer element method. Here the interface is modeled as a separate part, as one element thick part, and its thickness is varied 0.01 to 0.1 times the longest dimension of the element in the entire domain. Property of this thin layer is kept similar to that of the soil surrounding it, although its strength is degraded a little bit so as to accommodate the weathering part of the interface. But the stiffness is almost like always kept higher than the surrounding soil. For the present investigation, we have assumed the thickness of this particular element as 5 mm. Coming to the last method, that is contact friction method, it is based on Coulomb friction method model, and it is modeled by defining the coefficient of friction, and LS-Dyno provides many contact option for this, but for this I have used automatic surface to surface, and again there's always penetration problem in between elements when we go for FEM modeling. So for that I have also used for the pinball segment based contact constraint, so that to avoid any kind of penetration issue in between the parts. For this particular problem, I have assumed a circular tunnel with diameter of 5 meter, and it is buried 3 meter below the ground level. And we have assumed the thickness of the lining as 300 mm and made it as reinforced concrete. Explosive is located at the interface of topsoil and air, which is the worst case scenario when we consider surface explosion. TNT equivalent is used for the explosive, and the main focus of the study is actually to compare the contact methods. So the entire model is kept simple, wherein the element size is taken as 300 mm across. Symmetrical boundary condition has been used to simplify the computation, and non-reflecting boundary condition has been used in the outer sides of the domain, so that to avoid any reflection of the blast or shock wave from the outer side. Before going to the actual
Jagriti, can you be because already 8 minutes over, so can you be?
Yes, sir. I won't take long. Okay. So these are the method models that I've used, and again I've validated the model using certain empirical formula, and the validation was quite okay. So I've proceeded with the main problem. Here I've compared the three model methods based on the displacement time history measured on the crown of tunnel. We can see the shade node and decide thin layer element method. They actually coincide well up to a time instant of 0.085. After that, we can see that there's a variation in the rebound stage. So in this case, what happens is in shared node method, the rebound displacement is significantly higher, and it is because we have considered the lining, the interface has to be rigid. That is the issue with that. If you are going for thin layer method, what is that is this particular layer. It accommodates the opening and closing of the interface, and thus it acts almost flexible, and thus we have less rebound. But again, if we go to the contact friction method, it is giving a displacement of 1 mm, which is quite less, and is rebound occurring way behind the time, and we can see that the load transfer is not there properly. So I'll jump in onto the conclusion right now. So we can say that Desai thin element layer method and shared node method, they actually simulate the interface quite better than the contact method, Coulomb friction method. Although I would suggest that more investigation should be carried out to develop a numerical technique which would simulate the entire complex mechanism soil structure interface that would include bond stage, bond failure stage, and the friction sliding stage. So that would be all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jagriti, for your presentation. Okay, so I think all the presentations are over except the first presentation. I think the speaker is not available at present, so we will actually wind up. Now, before going to the question answer session, I'll just briefly tell about all the presentation that has actually been presented during this session. So the first presentation was by Ahmad Bilal on the topic nonlinear analysis of base isolated building having optimized number of base isolators, in which actually he has discussed about the lead laminated rubber bearings. Then he has given the optimization scheme for different types of isolator. Then another presentation was on parametric study on overturning moment ratio of buildings with shallow foundation for tsunami loading by Hema Malini P. She has discussed about the different parameters involved in the development of the model equation. And then another presentation was by Monulal Barnwal on the comparative study on predictive capability of different SSI models. He has actually compared the various studies on soil structure interaction and different types of models like continuum viscous base model, continuum rigid base model, and he has also conducted some set table test to develop the SSI models. Last presentation was by Jagriti Mandal on the topic numerical simulation of soil tunnel interaction under surface blast loading. She has discussed about the geometrical structure interface, and she has also discussed about the different methods like the shared node methods, contact friction methods, and has done finite element studies for the modeling. So these were the various presentations. I now request the audience to raise some questions to the delegates so that they will be able to answer your queries. So any questions they can directly ask. Right now, I'm not seeing any question raised on the chat box. I have actually a question. Hema Malini P, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So just a couple of queries. Actually, you have actually developed this equation, but whether you have conducted any model-based experimental studies, or it is just the
Um,
equation that you have developed?
no, sir, we fitted on model only. Further studies have been required for more validation of the model.
Okay. So overall, what actually your suggestion regarding your study?
Sir, so many buildings situated near the seashore. So many of the building with shallow foundation got overturned. So by this model, we have evaluate the overturning ratio of a building in advance. So we can predict. We have to predict overturning moment well in advance before designing the building foundation. So whether the shallow foundation will have a capacity to resist the overturning moment subjected to hydrodynamic force. By this study, we can we carried out this
So
study, sir.
can the same study be done on the deep foundation like pile foundation? Is it possible?
No, sir. This study is made only for shallow foundation. We take raft foundation for the study. So for deep foundation, we have for the structures many structures. We only noticed for a shallow foundation.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you,
Um,
sir.
okay. Ahmad Bilal, are you there? I had a question, but
Yes, yes.
yeah, Ahmad. Yeah, so you have discussed about the optimization studies for different base, this isolator. So I just have a question that what is the basis of selection of the isolators? On what basis you have actually selected?
When we design a structure, a fixed base building, then we get the vertical force at the base of every column. Based on that force, we design every base isolator. So when we try to reduce the number of isolators, then that reaction changes. Then we have to redesign it.
Okay.
So
So
did I answer it?
yeah. So as per your recommendation, you said that the two isolators at the center would be more cost effective, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The load has been distributed to other columns. Then.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So thank you very much.
Monolal, I have one.
Yeah.
Monolal,
Yes, sir.
Modular, yeah.
you have taken for the soil structure interaction, the springs are modeled, no, at the base of
Yes.
the spring.
Yes. Discrete Winkler based.
Yeah. What is
GNW.
the value of stiffness you took?
That depends on the modulus of the soil, and that is distributed along the springs. So
It's a linear spring or what is that? Or a
it is a
non-linear?
uniaxial spring having non-linear properties too. So in OpenSys we have in model already built up models for PY simple, TZ simple, and QZ simple. These are material models that have both the property of non-linear and the linear property. So it has a viscous component and a plastic component to for where it has a gap and element. So in that model, it means it defines nonlinearity also. So plastic and nonlinearity both is defined. So it is a nonlinear model. So if you do a pushover analysis, or if you do a nonlinear analysis, it will be deformed nonlinearly. Can I answer your question?
Yeah, I think I would like to get more details. Maybe I will contact you separately, sir.
Thank you, sir. It is you just you can Google it. There are 3 different types of uniaxial materials in OpenSys, and you will get a full PDF along with that. That PY simple, TZ simple, and QZ simple. So
Okay.
these are already inbuilt models, uh, developed by different researchers, and it takes into account various nonlinearity and viscous part, means plastic and viscous part of the soil. So it is just on beam on non-Winkler foundation, non-linear Winkler foundation.
Okay. Jagriti, just one question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you had done only the numerical modeling studies, but you have any plans for small, or you want to like compare with your small scale experimental studies?
So the issue is actually with experimental studies. So far I've tried for experimental study, but it's not possible, at least in India. I have to either contact DRDO for that, because
So,
civilians are not.
so the results that you obtain means how sure you will be about your results. Actually, that is my question.
So for that, I had validated the propagation of last wave values with experimental results. They are matching quite well. But then if I come to the soil structure interaction part, I haven't gotten any experimental data.
Okay,
So
okay,
that is the issue.
I have
okay.
one question.
Yes.
Your domain was 10 meter by 10 meter, and you choose the element size to be 200 mm.
Yes, actually this was
How
quite
you
a small.
justify?
Yes, I agree with that part. Actually, this was the initial stage of the study. It is just a small part of my entire PhD study. So, for the initial work, I have just modeled the simplified version. I have converted that into a other like bigger study. So, this was to just understand how the thin layer
Shall the
method.
responses will be similar, or it will have different oscillations? I mean, spurious oscillation component. Will the responses will be fine enough? Means
Yes,
I
sir,
have
of
doubt.
course. Yes, of course. For this one, the discretization was quite coarser. So if I go for a finer mesh size, the results would be different. Again, for the tunnel lining, even I have used a simplified model. I have used equivalent stiffness method to define the reinforcement and concrete. For the other model, for a much more uh, perfect model. I won't say a perfect, but it would have lesser assumption compared to this model. That one has showed much promising results actually. So I can actually model the opening and closing of the model, which actually simulates the actual interface between a structure and the soil. Regarding the bond failure, I'm still working on it.
Thank you.
Okay, so are there any more questions, or shall we wind up with this technical session?
I wanted some clarification
Yeah, sure, sure.
from Mr. Ahmed Bilal.
Yeah, Mr. Dr.
He
Ahmed
is
Bilal,
there,
Yes,
are
sir.
you there?
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Ahmed Bilal.
Yes, sir.
Yes, because you are reducing the number of Yes, you are reducing the number of isolators, as I
Yes,
understand. So, are you putting an additional slab above the
yes, sir. I discussed
isolators?
it there that at the level below the columns, we are providing a slab which will act as a
So,
rigid slab.
so it's a rigid slab across the whole building, right? Across the whole building.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so
Thank you.
okay, so yeah, thank you, delegates, for your nice presentations. And I would like to now conclude this session. by thanking the organization, especially Professor S.B. Dinesh sir, for giving us the opportunity to co-chair the session, and Dr. Srivalsa Kulathaya, Dr. Ravi Jakka for inviting me for this session. So thank you very much, sir. Now I would like to request Professor Tahmid to speak few words and wind up the session. Over to you,
Well,
sir.
well, thank you, Dr. Anil. Thank you for helping me out.
Thank
It's not easy task actually, sitting from my home in Dhaka. We are actually in a lockdown. So
Yeah, okay.
it's a very hard lockdown going right now. And I had just an online meeting in my department just while I was talking with you.
Okay.
Anyway, it is very nice for me to be here. I would like to thank Professor Dinesh. I didn't have a chance to thank him for introducing me and giving me and Anil, Dr. Anil, this opportunity. I would like to thank Dr. Srivalsa and Dr. Ravi Jakka, both of them, for inviting me to chair this session. It has been a great pleasure to be part of this very well-organized virtual conference on very, very nice lectures. I had the chance to see one or two keynote lectures. That's all. But it has been a wonderful experience being with this conference, and I hope all the publications will be of great interest to for future research. With these few words, I would like to applaud all the presenters for their exciting work. All of the presentations are on very relevant topics, actually, whether we call it soil structure interaction, blast loading, base isolation, and then we had this retaining wall. Actually, not much work has been done on the retaining wall, but probably in the future, this behavior of retaining walls will be very important. We'll have more and more of this kind of retaining walls, and their performance will be very important. The cost issue is very important also, and also the other paper with the tsunami modeling of buildings. That is another also important topic. So overall, it was an interesting session. It's the end of the day, and I would not like to take more time, but I would like to thank all the audience for being with us. Thanks again to the organizers, and thanks to Professor Dinesh and Dr. Anil. Thank you.
Yeah, we have come to the end of this technical session 24th. And on behalf of the organizing committee, I take this opportunity to thank Professor Tahmid Malik Husani, professor from Bangladesh University, for chairing this session and for the successful conduction of this technical session. Thank you very much, sir. And at the same time, I also take this opportunity to thank Anil Kumar Sharma, Assistant Professor at NID Patna,
Thank you, sir.
for co-chairing this session and very wonderfully conducting this session. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also thank Professor G. Madhavilata for the excellent and lucid lecture on geosynthetics in the retaining wall subjected to seismic loading. Thank you, ma'am. And I also thank all the other presenters who presented their work in this session. And I wish all of you the very best. Thank you. Thank you once again. Thank you all. Thank you all, sir.
Thank you, Dinesh.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.